Previously on the show, both Salvatore brothers entered the Phoenix Hellstone and Stefan was the first to wake up. Inside the Phoenix Stone, Damon's soul experienced an endless cycle of torment. He could only return to the real world by facing his pain head-on. Confronted by his mother's sacrifice, Damon finally accepted his anguish, and as a result, he was reborn into the real world. However, back in reality, the Salvatore brothers were frequently plagued by hallucinations. Damon burned Henry alive, but as he watched the coffin burn, he realized he had killed Elena instead, causing him to lose his will to live. Stefan, on the other hand, blamed everything on Julian, so he and Valerie joined forces to kill him. Bonnie, determined to protect her friends, decided to team up with Nora to investigate the mysterious female vampire hunter. The story continues from the last episode. The vampire hunter, who has terrified the vampires, is actually an old woman on the verge of death. Bonnie and Nora cast a locator spell and discover that the female hunter is in a mental hospital. As they prepare to investigate, Mary arrives, having also received a challenge from the hunter. Seeing how close Nora and Bonnie have become, Mary is overcome with jealousy. While traveling, Bonnie learns from Nora about the legendary vampire hunter Rayna, who has been hunting them since the 19th century. A shaman's magic turned Rayna into an immortal vampire hunter, and they forged the phoenix sword for her. Bonnie and Nora chatted and laughed, while Mary, who was ignored, could only sulk alone. When they arrive at the mental hospital, they get past all obstacles with ease through hypnosis. But Nora and Mary remain on high alert. To their surprise, they find only an elderly woman with silver hair in the hospital room.
This is your vicious, terrifying, big bad Huntress? Got it.
The old woman seemed to have dementia, completely ignoring their questions. This elderly woman, who even needed a feeding tube, didn't resemble a vampire hunter in the slightest. Her biggest wish was simply to have a bite of a cookie. Both Bonnie and Nora begin to suspect they've got the wrong person. However, Mary believes in the principle of better safe than sorry and suggests killing her anyway. Bonnie berates her for being so cold-hearted. Nora sides with Bonnie, which angers Mary, who storms off. Bonnie immediately urges Nora to go after Mary. Bonnie isn't naive. She knows Nora is using her to make her girlfriend jealous. After Nora leaves, a kind-hearted Bonnie steals a pack of cookies from another room. The elderly woman was very grateful and praised Bonnie for being a good girl.
What's a nice girl like you doing with two deviant vampires?
So you are the Huntress.
It turned out that Rayna had been pretending all along. If she had revealed her true identity, Nora and Mary would never have let her go, as her frail, elderly body posed little threat. Bonnie was curious why she had fallen into such a state. Rayna explains that while she gained immortality, she couldn't remain youthful like the vampires. When Bonnie kindly feeds her a cookie, Rayna suddenly attacks, choking her. Bonnie's magic proves useless against Rayna. Just then, Enzo, who had been missing for months, mysteriously appears and kills Rayna with a single stab. Bonnie, shocked, asks where Enzo has been all this time. As he collects Rayna's body, Enzo grumbles about Matt. It turns out Matt and a group of cavalry had captured him, and he had only recently managed to escape. At Enzo's request, Bonnie goes out to find a body bag. Meanwhile, after being released, Matt continued hunting vampires, unaware that Penny had been following him the entire time. Penny initially thought that Matt, staying behind in Mystic Falls, was just a crazy guy with strange behavior, but when she witnessed him kill a vampire with a wooden bullet, she began to believe in the existence of vampires. With Matt's explanations, Penny starts to understand more about Mystic Falls. Elsewhere, Mary goes to a bar to have a heart-to-heart with Nora. Now that she's seen Julian for what he truly is, she deeply regrets her past choices. Moved by Mary's sincerity, Nora forgives her. The two make up and rekindle their relationship. When they return to the hospital, they learn what happened to Bonnie. Bonnie accuses them of being so wrapped up in their romance that she almost got killed by Rayna, saved only by Enzo's timely intervention. They rush to the hospital room, only to find that Enzo has already taken Rayna's body. It turns out Enzo was the one sending all the emails. He knew that the heretics were terrified of Rayna, so he baited them, knowing they would stop at nothing to investigate. Through this, Enzo easily tracked down Rayna. After the body was burned, Rayna was reborn, transforming from an elderly woman into a young girl. Enzo clearly knew the secret, watching the frightened girl with a playful expression. Rayna glared at him in fury. The legendary female hunter who strikes fear into the hearts of vampires has finally emerged. After being reborn in fire, Rayna returns to her peak form, so powerful that not even bulletproof glass can contain her. It is only then that Enzo realizes he has unleashed a true Grim Reaper. Rayna comes from a long line of hunters, with her father Vicente being one of the Five, a group of vampire hunters enhanced by magic. Even the originals feared crossing paths with them. From a young age, Rayna showed incredible combat talent under her father's training. Whenever the horn sounded, signaling a vampire attack, Vicente would charge into battle without hesitation. Rayna always wanted to join him, but her father refused, saying she wasn't ready yet. Because she was worried about her father, Rayna secretly followed him. She discovered that her father had been seriously injured by a vampire. That vampire was Julian. Rayna showed no fear of Julian and revealed her father's identity as one of the Five. Killing one of the Five would curse the vampire, a fact that made Julian's face change with fear. The witch's curse was indeed terrifying, but Julian didn't want to let such a powerful enemy live. However, he couldn't kill Vicente himself. So, he came up with a twisted compromise.
I will not kill your father. You will.
Julian hypnotized Rayna, forcing her to take her father's life with her own hands. Though Rayna's mind remained conscious, her body was no longer under her control as she moved toward her father. Vicente, ever the stoic, reassured her, "This is not your fault." Seeking vengeance for her father, Rayna sought out the help of a group of shaman witches. 8 shamans cast a spell, gifting Rayna with powers that rivaled those of vampires and granting her immunity to magic. To Rayna's surprise, the shamans sacrificed their own lives, giving her their life force as well. Her sword was also enchanted, gaining the ability to absorb souls. Any vampire wounded by this sword would be hunted by Rayna for eternity until their soul was captured within the Phoenix Stone. The shamans had transformed Rayna into the ultimate vampire hunter, her power far surpassing that of the Five. At that time, Julian was terrorizing Europe with his heretics. Beau, who prided himself on his voice, was struck in the throat by Rayna's sword, and his wound refused to heal. Julian slammed into Rayna, sending her flying, and they seized the chance to escape, but Beau's wound continued to bleed profusely. It was as if Rayna had GPS tracking. She relentlessly pursued them. Julian tried his old tricks, but this time Rayna easily countered him. Her power was no less than that of a vampire. When Rayna attacked again, Julian drove a wooden stake through her abdomen. Julian thought that all was over, but Rayna got back up as if nothing had happened. Then she hurled the Phoenix sword, precisely piercing Julian's heart, and his soul was drawn into it. Later, in order to escape Rayna, the Heretics, led by Lily, went to New York. Before they had a chance to resurrect Julian, they were sealed by the Gemini Coven. Now that Rayna has the Phoenix sword again, Beau's scar has reopened, bleeding profusely once more. Marked by Rayna, Beau's fate is sealed. He cannot escape death. Nora and Mary, completely demoralized, flee in a panic. Meanwhile, Caroline, being a vampire, was nearly drained of all her blood by the twins she carried inside her. When Stefan arrived at the hospital to visit her, he found Caroline's limbs had shriveled. If the babies weren't delivered soon, her life would be at risk. In desperation, Stefan compelled a doctor to perform an emergency C-section. Valerie also arrived after hearing the news. But the twins refused to be born. The doctor's scalpel was inexplicably flung out of his hands. Valerie theorized that the twins wanted to keep feeding on the magic in Caroline's blood. The only solution, she suggested, was to gather enough magic outside of Caroline's body so that the twins would no longer resist being born. Valerie began preparing to ask the Heretics for help. On the other side, after Damon sensed Bonnie's arrival, he hurriedly tried to get the woman out of the house. But Bonnie still picked up on something suspicious. Since Stefan had kept his brother's secret, Bonnie and the others still didn't know that Elena's body had been burned. Just as Bonnie began pointing fingers at Damon, Enzo called, prompting Damon to mock her. Bonnie was still upset about Enzo stealing Rayna's body, while Enzo, on the other hand, was hoping she would hand over the Phoenix sword. When Bonnie refused, Enzo threatened Damon. If he didn't hand over the Phoenix sword, Enzo would reveal to everyone that Elena had been burned. Damon had no choice but to ask Bonnie for the Phoenix sword. When Bonnie inquired about the reason, Damon refused to explain, and Bonnie reluctantly agreed. They chose a classroom as the meeting place. Upon arriving at the classroom, Bonnie and Damon found Enzo sitting motionless in the back row, and the dimly lit room sent chills down their spines. Rayna kidnapped Enzo, and in order to stay alive, Enzo was forced to help her retrieve the Phoenix sword. When Bonnie learned that the old woman was Rayna, she was in complete disbelief. Without a word, Rayna attacked Bonnie, and Damon, left with no choice, threw the Phoenix sword out the window. After a century, Rayna finally reclaimed her sword. The moment she held the Phoenix sword, she immediately sensed her target for the hunt. Meanwhile, at the hospital, 4 heretics combined their powers, gathering magic outside Caroline's body, allowing the C-section to proceed smoothly. But just as the procedure was underway, Beau's scar split open again, interrupting the spell. Nora quickly contacted Bonnie. Upon learning that Rayna had retrieved the Phoenix sword, Nora and the others immediately prepared to flee. But Valerie was determined to stay and continue the spell.
They could drain you, Val. You could die.
I have to try.
After healing Bonnie, Damon ignored Enzo's pleas for help and headed straight for the hospital to provide backup. The 3 heretics had barely stepped out of the hospital when they ran into Rayna. Beau was stabbed through the heart, leaving Nora and Mary with no choice but to flee. Rayna ignited Beau's corpse before striding confidently into the hospital. Valerie stood alone, casting the spell. Stefan, deeply concerned for Caroline, took her wrist and entered her dream. Once the babies were born, nothing could keep them apart. This was Stefan's promise to her. Just in time, Damon arrived and blocked Rayna in the hallway. Sizing up Rayna, Damon couldn't help but mock her.
You know, you look a lot like my girlfriend and her 3 doppelgangers.
Meanwhile, Bonnie assisted Valerie with the spell. Alaric finally arrived as well. He had been in another region these past days, purchasing a new home. Damon was no match for Rayna on his own, and everyone urged Stefan to go help him. Although Stefan was worried about Caroline and didn't want to leave, he couldn't let his brother be sent back into the Phoenix Hellstone again. At the critical moment, Stefan stepped forward to take the blow for his brother. Kicking Rayna aside, his mind flashed to the promise he had made to Caroline. Now, he had to break his promise. Any vampire marked by the Phoenix sword would be relentlessly hunted by Rayna for eternity.
I'll see you, brother.
To protect his friends, Stefan had no choice but to go on the run. Rayna's only target now was Stefan, so the others in the hospital were spared. With the spell completed by Valerie and Bonnie, the twins were finally born, and Alaric was overjoyed. Damon returned to the classroom, ready to take out his frustration on Enzo. If not for Enzo, Rayna wouldn't have been reborn, and Stefan wouldn't be forced to flee. At that moment, Enzo revealed something to Damon. Elena was still alive. Tyler had set up a decoy coffin, and Damon had been tricked by a hallucination. The sudden news left Damon ecstatic. He quickly called Stefan to share the good news and promised that he would find a way to kill Rayna. Caroline also called Stefan. Upon hearing what had happened to him, she broke down in tears. Stefan reassured her, promising he would return to her side. Alaric named the 2 daughters Josie and Lizzie, Josie in memory of his late wife, and Lizzie in honor of Caroline's mother. 3 years later, one night, Caroline drove away from Mystic Falls with the 2 daughters in tow. Alaric reminded her to drive safely. Lizzie was sleeping soundly, while Josie, full of energy, was asking questions nonstop.
Where are we going?
To New Orleans? To visit Mommy's friend.
The person Caroline is visiting on this trip is none other than Klaus Ever. Since Rayna had stabbed Stefan, the cross-shaped scar on his chest had acted like a tracking device, constantly revealing his location. In order to avoid Rayna, Stefan had been on the run without rest. Valerie, guiding him remotely, instructed him to head to New Orleans, where there was a safe house that could block magic and temporarily shield him from Rayna's pursuit. On the other side, Damon and Bonnie, through Enzo's introduction, arrived at an organization called the Armory, a group dedicated to collecting supernatural artifacts, creatures, and knowledge. The cavalry that kidnapped Enzo worked for this organization. After Tyler left Mystic Falls, he made contact with the Armory. It was through his connections that Matt hired the Armory's cavalry to capture Enzo. The leader of the Armory is a sharp, no-nonsense woman, referred to as the Collector. She claimed to know Enzo's true origins, which is why Enzo worked for the Armory. Enzo told Damon and Bonnie that the Armory was willing to help capture Rayna, but only if Stefan would lure her to them.
I'll have to discuss this with my counsel.
Caroline had just given birth, but Alaric was already planning to move to Dallas, catching Caroline off guard. Alaric didn't want the children growing up in a town full of vampires, and Caroline agreed to escort them there. In truth, Caroline couldn't bear to part with the twins. After Stefan arrived in New Orleans, he concealed the cross-shaped scar on his chest to avoid attracting attention. The safe house Valerie had spoken of turned out to be a bar, and Stefan was finally able to sit down and enjoy a drink in peace. Valerie was Damon's security consultant, and when she heard he planned to collaborate with the Armory, her face turned grim. She warned Damon that the Armory was far from a charitable organization. They wouldn't care if Stefan died in the process. They would stop at nothing to capture Rayna. Meanwhile, Nora and Mary, who were on the run, were captured by the Armory's cavalry. After returning to the Armory, Damon lied, claiming he didn't know Stefan's whereabouts. After saying this, he tried to leave with Bonnie. Enzo blocked their way, saying, "You came here but leaving? That's not up to you." Before Damon could finish his threat, Enzo ambushed him with a gun laced with vervain, knocking him out. Enzo then quickly took down Bonnie as well. When Damon regained consciousness, he found Tyler unconscious beside him. After Damon had nearly beaten him to death, the Armory had been keeping Tyler alive, waiting for the full moon so he could heal by transforming into a werewolf.
Oh, did I forget to mention that tonight's a full moon?
The prison cell was made of reinforced glass, and a weakened Damon had no hope of breaking through it. Bonnie, however, was treated much better. When she woke up, she attacked Enzo, only to discover that her magic was gone. The Armory had developed a drug that suppressed magical abilities, similar to how vervain affected vampires. Without her magic, Bonnie was no longer a threat. Back at the lively bar, Stefan sat brooding, not even ordering a drink. At that moment, someone slid a glass over to him.
Welcome to New Orleans.
Stefan turned his head. Unexpectedly, he ran into Klaus here. Seeing an old friend again, Stefan's mood brightened. Klaus, curious, asked why Stefan was alone. After all, the Salvatore brothers were inseparable. Stefan lied, saying he had had a fight with his brother and was hiding out to avoid being found. After a lot of beating around the bush, Klaus finally couldn't hold back and asked about Caroline's current situation. Stefan, feeling a bit sad, admitted that it would take several rounds of drinks to cover that topic. Klaus's smile deepened. Their encounter seemed almost fated. Meanwhile, Damon and Tyler were locked up together, and tonight was the full moon. Tyler could transform into a werewolf at any moment. All of the Armory's doors could only be opened with a member's handprint. Enzo, completely indifferent to Damon's fate, enraged Bonnie. And that was precisely the issue. Enzo's jealousy over Bonnie's concern for Damon. "No matter what Damon does wrong, you always forgive him," Enzo said. While Enzo was distracted, Bonnie grabbed a metal can and knocked him out, then followed up with 2 gunshots. Meanwhile, Damon contacted Stefan, joking that he was about to dance under the moon with Tyler, and suggested that Stefan ask Klaus for some of his blood. Klaus was deeply interested in Caroline's life experiences. He couldn't believe that after all these years, Caroline was now the mother of 2 children. And it sounded like those heretics were a real handful. Stefan quickly clarified that Caroline wasn't actually the children's mother, explaining that she had become their surrogate by chance. Klaus had no objections to Stefan and Caroline's relationship, especially since he had once accepted Caroline being with Tyler. Klaus criticized Stefan, asking why he wasn't by Caroline's side now that the children had been born. Klaus is really too gentle. Stefan hurriedly changed the subject, mentioning that Damon had run into some trouble with a werewolf and hoped Klaus could spare a bit of his blood to help. "That's a small favor," Klaus said. Suddenly, Klaus noticed blood seeping from Stefan's chest. He quickly pulled back Stefan's shirt and immediately recognized the mark. Even Klaus was deeply afraid of Rayna. Realizing his secret was out, Stefan admitted he was there seeking refuge. Klaus was furious. "I'm hosting you with fine wine and food, and you're trying to lead that evil Huntress here?" Klaus was truly livid. It turned out that many years ago he had crossed paths with Rayna, and many of his close advisors had died at her hands. If Rayna came to his town again, it would be catastrophic. Klaus's position wasn't as secure as it appeared. He too had powerful enemies surrounding him. He didn't want to provoke another persistent female hunter. Stefan, however, seized on an important clue. If Klaus had faced Rayna before, he must know how to break free from the hunter's mark. But a furious Klaus refused to reveal anything.
Get out. If I leave, she'll kill me. And if you stay, I will.
Stefan had no choice but to leave, his steps heavy with defeat. In his rush to leave, Stefan forgot his phone at the bar. Just then, the phone rang. Klaus glanced at the caller ID. It was Caroline. In the heat of his anger, Klaus immediately became conflicted. After calming himself, he answered the phone, his voice as gentle as ever.
Hello, love.
That familiar greeting left Caroline in disbelief. At that moment, Caroline was in a fast food restaurant alone with her older daughter. Alaric had taken the crying younger daughter outside for some fresh air, but the older daughter had also woken up and started crying uncontrollably. As a new mother, Caroline felt completely overwhelmed. Now a father himself, Klaus immediately shared some tips with Caroline on how to soothe the child. He even joked that he could send her some of his daughter's old clothes, since babies go through outfits so frequently. But Caroline's mind was on Stefan's safety. Klaus reassured her, promising that he would look after Stefan. Despite the years and the changes in their lives, Klaus still doted on Caroline. Finally, Caroline's heart was at ease, because Klaus's promises were never empty. There was so much Klaus wanted to say to Caroline.
I was sorry to hear about your mother, Caroline. I'm sure she would have loved to see you with the little ones.
Oh my God, she's finally sleeping.
Well then, we mustn't wake her. Goodbye, Caroline.
But will Stefan manage to escape Rayna's relentless pursuit? And will Damon, Tyler, and Bonnie find a way to break free from the Armory? Let's look forward to the exciting plot in the next episode.